Hello and welcome to Zoobean Experts on Air. We are here today with Little eLits and Skokie Public Libraries, Amy Koester. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me today, Jordan.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. I recently discovered Little eLit, like not that recently at this point, huh? Several months ago, but it's a wonderful service. I was going to read exactly from your website what Little eLit, how you describe it. Little eLit is a crowdsourced, grassroots professional learning network that works to develop promising practices for the incorporation of new media into library collections, services, programs for families with young children. That is a mouthful, but tell me a little bit more. Help me put that into layman's terms and describe to us what Little eLit is and sort of you and your background, how you came to be so involved with the group.
Yeah, well, Little eLit started in 2011 it was a personal librarian blog by a librarian named Ken Campbell, who's the person behind all of it. She's the energy and the know-how. So it started in 2001, which was a year after the iPad was debuted, and she started thinking, all right, well, families are using this. I see families in my community using it. How might that apply to the services we provide at the library? And so she started experimenting, doing some digital storytime pilot projects, and just recounting them, recapping them on littleelit.com. So at that point, it was just one librarian's viewpoint of what they were trying, what they were encountering, obstacles, successes, all of those things that really any librarian has when they're trying something new. And over the next year and a half, it kind of picked up steam, and more librarians found the resource and also recognized that they were also trying some of these new technologies in their programming, in their library environments. So just when people can come into the library on their own and interact with what the library has on hand. And so it developed kind of into a group effort, a group reporting forum, if you will, so that multiple people, not just Ken, were reporting on what they tried, what apps they had success with, what technology glitches they encountered, and some fixes they had figured out. So really, Little eLit stemmed from one librarian recognizing that this is kind of a new platform that families are using, and so wanted to be, I guess, ahead of the curve so that when families started to ask at the library, she was prepared. And it turned out that she wasn't the only one doing these things in the libraries, thinking about new media and young children. And there were lots of librarians and library professionals clamoring to be part of a larger conversation, which is what Little eLit has evolved into. It's grassroots because it didn't start with a formal library organization. It's all volunteer-based. People just contribute their feedback, their blog posts of their own volition. So that's the grassroots aspect of it. And it is really librarians and library professionals trying to suss out this new landscape and see how we can best serve the families that we've always been serving when there's this new kind of component into what they're using for play, for leisure, for literacy. So that's the background on Little eLit. I got involved in 2013 at an ALA midwinter meeting, and I had known a little bit about Little eLit before that. I had checked it out for its app reviews and some of the how-tos on what they were doing. But in Seattle, that January was when I first met Ken, and she's just absolutely electric. She's so enthusiastic about serving kids, serving families, that she can basically get anyone on her team to probably for anything she wants, but she channeled it towards young children and new media in the library. So I got involved at that point and started editing and managing the littleelit.com website, all of the blog content, which actually segued perfect with what I was doing at the time. I was a branch children's librarian in a 12-branch system in Missouri, and I was starting to experiment with incorporating some new media aspects into the preschool services I was providing. So it dovetailed quite nicely with what I was doing in my professional work and allowed me to help kind of set some guideposts on littleelit.com for librarians who were starting to think about trying these things or wanted to try them but needed to be able to provide some research or support to their administrators or their supervisors for why it was worthwhile to take that leap.
Thank you. That's great background. So you are a librarian. Everybody who's contributing are all librarians, and I wonder, do you think it was a stretch initially to say, hey, this should be our role to not only be providing reader's advisory for kids, but to also be thinking about what apps they might want to use and how they might want to use them, and giving parents tips. And there's so much great content in Little eLit. Was that group? Have you seen that group of people? First of all, I would say, did you find that to be a stretch initially? For others, was it sort of like a vanguard of people, and now you're seeing others come along? Or what is your sort of experience of libraries and librarians' relationship with apps especially?
Yeah, well, I think what we see now in the landscape is we're kind of either at the top or still climbing part of a bell curve in terms of the mentality amongst youth librarians in particular that we should know about these things because our families want to know about them. The families we serve want to know. It didn't start out that way. I feel like, at least from my perspective, it definitely started out with a dedicated group of professionals who had the means both to spend time researching what the effects of new media might be on young children, what their early literacy applications might be. Not every librarian has time in their schedule to be able to do that. So the ones who did and then decided they felt strongly about this new format for literacy really put the work in. And there was a lot of work involved. I think, as with anything new, there was a lot of questioning at the beginning from a large proportion of the profession. And that's not to say that the majority of people were just adamantly no iPads, never.
What were some of those questions? What were some of the larger questions that were like the philosophical questions behind whether or not you should be sort of recommending and thinking about it?
Yeah, the philosophical questions were extremely well-meaning. They were things like, do we know enough about what is a positive way to use this type of technology to be able to confidently recommend it to our families? Do we have a responsibility at any point to provide access to these materials if the majority or even part of our population won't have access at home? And there are two ways to look at that. We should provide access because they won't get it anywhere else, or we shouldn't provide access because if they don't have it at home, they don't necessarily need to know how to use it effectively. And there are also a lot of great kind of philosophical questions of, don't we have enough to accomplish already in promoting early literacy for these young children and their families without adding another component? Early literacy has seen a huge resurgence in its importance in youth librarianship in the last 10, 12 years. A lot of that having to do with the Every Child Ready to Read at Your Library program, which was put out by the Public Library Association and the Association for Library Service to Children. We don't like short names in libraries, apparently.
Thank you for not doing another acronym, though. I think everyone would be better served by that.
Yes. So with that early literacy push, there's a lot of training involved. And then when you add a new component, like a digital media, something that a lot of the librarians, library staff leading, for instance, story time, they might not have the personal know-how of using this technology either effectively or, more importantly, confidently. And so can we afford the training aspect of whatever this new landscape might be? And also I think there was a good question of, well, this is brand new. We don't know where it's going. We don't know how long it will be here. what type of investment is reasonable for us to make as really institutions that are funded by taxpayer money and are beholden to what our communities want. If they haven't demonstrated they want it.
Why do you think that it is so important? Obviously, you do this as a real labor of love for you and for Ken and everyone else in the community. Why do you feel that it's so important for librarians to play this role in the community and to take on this additional piece? You know, libraries are far more than books, right? Why is it so important to take that on, even though you're not technically fulfilling the apps necessarily, right? Maybe folks have iPads in their libraries or what have you, but generally a lot of the new media might not be readily available at the library all the time, and it's sort of recommending things that are happening outside of the library. Why is that so important for you and for others?
Well, I know for me personally, it's important because I want to give the families who come to the library every tool possible so that they can promote early literacy skill development with their children. And when it comes down to it, a book is a tool to be able to do that. Oral storytelling is a tool. Children's songs and nursery rhymes, they're tools. And from my perspective, new media technology is another tool as well. And I found it an extremely compelling argument why I needed to include that aspect, even just to kind of pay it lip service and mention it, even if I wasn't using an app in Storytime. I found it important because all of the Pew surveys keep showing more and more families across socioeconomic strata have at least a smartphone, if not some other sort of tablet device. And the fact that they have it and that they could potentially use it for positive early literacy interactions with their child, not for their child, with, and I can talk about that a bit in a little bit, but if they can understand that it's a positive tool they can use with their child, that's something I want to be able to facilitate. And I think there are a lot of people involved in Little eLit who feel the same way, and also feel that even parents who feel like they're savvy and they know what's going on can still be very overwhelmed by the landscape of new media. I mean, anyone who's gone to the App Store or Google Play Store and you look through education apps, I mean, it's like a minefield. You don't know necessarily what you're getting, what reviews to trust, and that I think was another component of why librarians both wanted to participate in Little eLit and responded so positively to it, because it was providing a librarian vetted and professional vetted, I shouldn't say just librarians, we've got other folks, social workers, teachers involved in the project, but they wanted to participate in building that resource for what's good, what can we recommend confidently based on our knowledge and expertise in early literacy, and they wanted to be able to share that resource with their families.
Yeah, and I think obviously we agree with you. We've been working, as you know, with a few Little eLit contributors who work with us at Zoobean on our Beanstack product for libraries, and it's really amazing to me to see how incredibly passionate they are about sharing this information and really sort of digging in, and they are so incredibly knowledgeable and are really sort of staying on top of what's new and what's coming out, which is getting me to thinking about, there are all these contributors. What are some of are there any kind of neat anecdotes or things, stories that you've heard from the field, so to speak, or from the branch, I guess, that are inspiring to you, or that are showing you that you're seeing sort of like this wave is really catching on? Anything you want to share?
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of professionals who are contributing app reviews to littleelit.com, getting really excited about, they're willing to kind of start trying in this new landscape. Maybe they haven't done more than one digital story time, so to speak, before, but they're willing to give it a shot. And then having their feedback of, I didn't know how this was going to go with this particular app, but the kids really loved it, and they were shouting out suggestions of, this is just a random thing in my head, and they're shouting out suggestions of what type of hat to put on the character, and then, or they wanted to read the story again because of all of the sounds that the app made and that we could then mimic. So seeing the surprise at how delighted and engaged kids were I think has been really fantastic. I think there's still kind of a cultural viewpoint that media is passive. And to a certain extent, that's what the recommendations that come out from the American Academy of Pediatrics still seem to promote this idea that screen time universally is this kind of passive, like with television, which is what it's been for the longest. But seeing librarians recognize that this new technology, sure, it can be passive, but we're trying to promote apps and digital stories that have interactive components so that it's not about playing with the app, so to speak. It's about facilitating a relationship between a child and an adult. So that's what we're really going for. And I think for me personally, the most gratifying things I've seen in the library, both at my old library in Missouri and now at Skokie Public Library, in seeing we've got iPads preloaded with age-appropriate apps in the children's area, and seeing a young child sitting in one stool and the parent sitting in the next, and them interacting with the app together. The parent, in an alphabet app saying, okay, so what letter is this? Can you trace it with your finger? What sound do you think that makes? If it's A, which of these fruits do you think starts with the letter A? Let's sound it out. So seeing them interact in those ways has been really gratifying for me, and shows that we're doing something positive.
Definitely that. So speaking of that sort of the importance of co-play and working together, and then you were also, I know you frequently mention the phrase media mentors, and these are some of the very important pieces that I think you share in the trainings. I've heard from many librarians around the country how much they love the trainings that that Little eLit Communities has hosted. I would love to hear sort of what are some of the, without giving away your full training, obviously, what are a few of the sort of key components, key messages that in an initial basic training that you're really trying to get across in the workshops, I should say, that you and the team are leading around the country? What are some of those core messages that you're really trying to put out there?
Yeah, well, we definitely have a few key points that we're trying to get across. One of them being, families are using technology, and the library serves families. So the library should do what it can, in our opinion at least, to serve families where they are. And if they want to know what's a good app, we should, at the very least, know of a resource where we can find that information. Fundamentally, that's what we do as libraries. I think another of our key messages is that it's never about the technology, it's not about the media, it's about the relationships that it can facilitate and the learning that can result from that. So you're never going to hopefully see someone with Little eLit getting into an argument about, yes technology or no technology, because it's kind of a red herring. That's not what the actual argument we're trying to make is. The argument we're trying to make is that everything we can do to promote relationships that will help develop young children's literacy are things that we want to support. So when we're making recommendations and we're giving trainings to library staff members on how to use digital media in their libraries and their programs, we really try and emphasize that this is not a replacement of what you're already doing. It's a supplement. It's another way for families to gain these skills and interact together. And I think that can be a huge mental shift for a lot of people. There are so many articles online on blogs, but also from newspapers that they either take a yes technology or no technology standpoint, and that doesn't help families at all. If anything, it just confuses them because families want to do what's best for their kids. But if we're saying, some of us are saying yes, some of us are saying no, how is that supporting them? What sort of resources are we giving them? So that's what we try and emphasize in our trainings, that it's not about, yes, you have to include this aspect in your story time. It's not a 21st century story time if you don't have, an iPad. That's not it at all. It's how do we support 21st century families?
And do you see more families now proactively coming in? Because what I hear you describing is like, well, if a parent comes and wants to know what they should look for, what they should be doing, or when they're asking for around a certain skill set, maybe I want a certain topic and interest. You want to be able to provide lots of different tools. One might be an app, another might be a book. They're sort of all tools to the same means, the same end, or the same process. And I wonder, do you in Skokie and then generally elsewhere, do you notice that families are, much like they might be asking around books and suggestions, are they more proactively coming and looking for suggestions and assuming that librarians will have that knowledge to do the app advisory?
That's a good question. I think it really varies a lot based on how familiar families are with what the library can offer. In an average 4-hour reference shift at the youth desk, I don't even get asked that many book recommendations. It's more often people come in and say, "This is what I want. Do you have it?" So I think that there's perhaps a divide between families knowing they can come in just for recommendations. In libraries, we've been doing that for so long, we assume everyone knows about it, but that's not necessarily the case. What I have seen a lot more of is when families recognize, oh, wait, they have iPads here, and it's not just Dora the Explorer game. Sorry, Dora. That the kid just sits and watches and kind of plays. Like, these are interactive things. They're learning. They're interested. They see that the library offers that, and then they come talk to us about it. So it really facilitates those conversations. So from my perspective, what I think one of the best things the libraries can do, if they see that their families are engaging in new media, whether it's on library devices or their personal devices, is provide these subtle opportunities to start that conversation, whether that is, in a regular storytime program, adding a song app for one of your song portions instead of, playing a CD, you can do an interactive song on the iPad, and then talking about it. Or I've seen a lot of libraries do app advisory programs, especially after the holidays when a lot of families get their first tablet or their new tablet. So ways that facilitate the opening of that conversation with caregivers so that we can kind of highlight the expertise that librarians have acquired in the past year or two.
Yeah, that's great. A better differentiation than how I framed it, I think. What about some of the systems, library systems that you have a very nice global perspective here of all these different systems, and you're seeing what's happening. What are some of the systems that you view as being really sort of out in front here, and some of the ways that they're sort of addressing new media in their communities?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the front runners has always been the Darien Library in Connecticut. In I think as early as 2011, maybe it was 2012. I'd have to double check that. But they, under the leadership of Gretchen Casserati, who's now the director of the Meridian Library District in Idaho, while she was at Darien, she put together early literacy iPad kits that families could check out. They came preloaded with apps that had been vetted by the children's librarians at the library, with some descriptions on why they were positive apps, the sorts of learning and skills that they promoted. So what I think was great about that, and other libraries have replicated it, is that not only are you giving families access, which can be key for those who either don't have the means to have technology or haven't decided they want to invest in it at this point. So you're giving them access, but you're also giving them some tools to think about what are good ways to use this, because they have some good examples. So I think they've been a huge front runner and exemplar for a good way to do that. It's tough because there are so many libraries doing so many great things. Um, Carissa Christner with Madison Public Library has started doing something called the Supper Club, where I believe it's once a month. She partners with a local restaurant so that families can get a discounted meal, bring it to the library, or they can bring their own dinner. And while they're eating, she demonstrates a number of apps for predominantly iPads. Most people with kids still have iPads, although that's changing. So she's demonstrating these apps, talking about why they're great and positive, early literacy, positive ways families can use them with their young children. So it's an informal, kind of fun entertainment educational program, which I think is really outstanding. But yeah, there are so many different examples. We Little eLit with the iSchool at Washington and the Association for Library Service to Children did a survey this past summer, basically trying to get a feel for the landscape of young children, new media, and libraries. And we had 415 libraries respond, and of those, 71% use technology in some aspect in their services to youth. That's a pretty high number. So there are a lot of great things going on, and it's just continuing to grow.
I love both of those stories. Carissa we've been working with Carissa, and she is super creative. So I think that seems like another. I did not know about the Supper Club, so that's another extension of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're moving into with Little eLit. You are sort of crowdsourced, and you're taking a step further, crowdsourcing a book, and so to speak. And I have to read the title because it's long. But Young Children, New Media, and Libraries, a guide for incorporating new media into library collections, services, and programs for families and children ages 0 to 5.
Yeah, it's not short either.
No, but it's descriptive. And I saw it today, a few days ago, Anne, who's someone else working with us, I printed out her chapter. I haven't read it yet. So far, the way the book is being released is really neat. It's sort of chapter by chapter. Anne's chapter is chapter 3, so there have already been a couple of others I've read that have been released. And then eventually it'll all be together as an ebook. I know when Claudia said, I need to take a break from curating for a minute because I had to finish my chapter at this point, So I know that everybody's working really hard, and they're literally authoring a book on the topic to sort of expand that notion of, it's just, I guess, to create some more nuance around the idea of yes or no technology, and really helping to explore that gray area in between, and that's really what as I sort of read these books, read the chapters, that's what I'm seeing. Tell us a little bit about the decision to create a book and to have this tremendous resource there, and sort of what that process has been like, and what the ultimate goal with the book is.
Yeah. Well, despite the fact that folks have been sharing lots of this similar information on littleelit.com for several years, there was still a huge request from the profession, but when is there going to be the book? Despite the fact that we're also information savvy.
It's like you have to have a book, right?
Yeah, we want that book, that resource. And so that's what we looked at doing with this Little eLit book. So the goal is to basically provide a primer on this topic for someone who's new or has just jumped into the water, so to speak, and give them all of the tools, or at least the tools to point them in the right direction for what they need to find out. So it's got some of the research background of the major recommendations and position statements from folks like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and the Fred Rogers Center. It's got information on this idea of joint media engagement or co-viewing from the Joan Gans Cooney Center at the Sesame Street Workshop. So you heard, Fred Rogers, Sesame Workshop, these big names in young children's education development. So these are statements that have a lot of research and support behind them. So we want to provide access to those sorts of things, access to the research that shows in what ways new media technology has been positive in developing skills, in what ways maybe it hasn't been that much different than a book. I would say if there's no reason it's different than a book, use a book, because you can check out a book from the library probably much easier than you can an app. Excuse me. We're also looking to go beyond that kind of theoretical discussion and give some practical tips. There's going to be a chapter coming later on different ways you could conceivably use digital technology in your story time. Whether, from just a simple add it in as one element of your overall story time to a larger range of activities. So for librarians and storytime practitioners who haven't been able to go to a training or go and see a conference session on this topic, they have some concrete steps for how they could think about implementing new media with the young children they serve. Also, Claudia and Carissa Kluver, who is a social worker, that's her background, and she also helms digitalstorytime.com. They have been working on an app evaluation chapter. So one of the biggest requests that we've heard across the landscape is librarians wanting to know, well, there's so much out there. How do I tell what's good? What are some of my benchmarks? What's my rubric? So that's going to be in there as well. So the goal really is to give everyone who wants the information on how to start out thinking on this topic, they'll have that resource. And the reason we decided to publish it on our own, it's Creative Commons licensed, it's not through any established publishers. The reason we did that is because we recognize it's such an ever-changing landscape. What this landscape of new media and what was available now is wholly different from when we started talking about the book like a year and a half ago. And so by doing it ourselves, doing it online, doing it digitally, we feel really strongly that we can go in and modify as necessary. And we entirely believe that the landscape will continue to change, and that will behoove us that we're able to make those changes and reflect realistic practice now.
Yeah, I think it's a really wonderful idea, and I definitely see the need. There are only so many of you to do trainings and workshops, and this is a great, and certainly like if you're not able to have access to that immediately, a really wonderful way of understanding how to work with new media in your library. So that was a great sort of look into what else we can expect to see, and I think that it seems very applicable and very worthwhile. So we look forward to those. We had one question that came in as I'm here, and then I would love to also know to wrap us up. Anything else, if you want to think about anything else that you haven't been asked that you want to make sure that you share with this community. So the question that came in as we were talking was around recommending apps that cost money. And if you believe in always recommending free apps, or do you just look for what's best?
Yeah. Well, for me personally, and I think it really is up to individuals and what their library's philosophies are and what they want to promote to their customers. But for me personally, if it's going to be something that is accessible on our devices in the library, that folks can come in when they want and use it, or they can come to a specific program and use it, I don't have any qualms at that point about the library paying for the app. When it comes to making recommendations kind of casually or in story times, I do like to offer a good range of free apps, and there are some great ones that are promoting early literacy skill development that are free. One great one that I want to mention is it's Feltboard Mother Goose on the Loose. It's based on Betsy D. McCohen's Mother Goose on the Loose program, where families, they share lots of nursery rhymes with their kids as a early literacy skill development process, and that's totally free. So I like to balance a lot of free with perhaps some really stellar paid apps. And I think we need to give families credit that they are going to know their means, know if they're interested in paying for something. Me personally, if someone comes up to me and starts to pitch something, I'm an adult. I can decide if I want to pursue it or look into it further or not, and families can do the same thing. So as long as we're not entirely alienating people by only having things that cost like $7.99, I don't see too much of an issue with being thorough in what we're recommending.
Excellent. And finally, do you want to share anything else? Is there anything else you want to make sure that we talked about or covered, or something else you want to share?
Yeah, well, I think I want to leave with the idea of librarians as media mentors. So Lisa Guernsey is a professional she did a TEDx talk earlier this year, 2014, and she talked at one point she talked about, wouldn't it be great if every family had someone in their community who could serve as a media mentor? So someone who can support the family in making the best decisions that are most appropriate for them. Because what's best for family A is not necessarily what's best for family B. And I think we as librarians have always recognized that. I mean, you see it as fundamentally as there are some families who come in and check out lots of books and some who tend to get more movies. That's, not making any sort of judgment there, so that different families will have different needs. And wouldn't it be great if they had someone in the community to support that? And that's the role that we at Little eLit feel very strongly that librarians need to be filling. We already exist in a space that is free, open to the public, meant to serve and promote learning and skill development. And this is just another way to fulfill that mission, by knowing the resources that are out there, knowing the recommendations, and giving parents all of the tools to be able to make the best and most realistic decisions for their family. No judgment on our part, just giving them the resources so that they can do it most effectively. And so that's what we're really trying to emphasize now with Little eLit. And it took us some time in getting to that position. Like I said earlier, this is still so evolving, but what doesn't evolve is our dedication to serving families. And so that, I think, is the real crux of what we're trying to do.
That's awesome, and we're so grateful that you're doing it, and so glad to have found one another, and I really appreciate it. I know we initially had intended on having you and Ken, but I think that this has been absolutely wonderful, and you spoke to saying Ken's enthusiasm is infectious, but I think maybe you caught it, but it's certainly exudes through the screen here. So thank you very much, Amy, and the site is littleelit.com, or if you're in Skokie, go to the library. Okay, thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Jordan, for having me.
Awesome, thank you.
Yay.